Hello, everyone. My name is Zoran Dogas, and I work at the University of Split School of Medicine, and my area of research is neuroscience and sleep medicine. Today, I will talk about sleep and wakefulness within the Module 1 of Sleep Medicine curriculum that we developed via eSleep D-Health digital literacy that enables up-to-date sleep medicine in inclusive healthcare, which is Erasmus Plus K2 grant. Talking about sleep and wakefulness could be very complex, but I'll try to simplify it as much as possible. The lecture outline is going to be the rhythm of wakefulness and sleep, a couple words about that, and then about the theory behind, which is mainly known as the two-process model, which is composed of two mechanisms. One is circadian rhythm, or process C, and the sleep homeostasis, which is called also process S. Finally, I'll say a couple words about sleep medicine and sleep disorders linked to rhythm of wakefulness and sleep. To start with the old experiment done by Jean-Jacques Dortot de Meren, who was observing the plant in front of the window. The plant was exposed to daylight and night, or sunshine and moonlight, darkness and light, whatever you want, and he observed that the leaves on the plants were up during the day and folded during the night. So he was wondering, was this due to outside time cues or external signals coming to the plant, or it is maybe due to intrinsic regulation or intrinsic clock within the plant. So he decided to put the plant in the closed box underneath the window, and then he was observing the leaves again. What he found out was that during the days, the leaves were still up, and during the night, the leaves were still folded, despite the fact that the plant was in the closed surroundings or in the closed environment underneath the window. Of course, the logical conclusion was that there is an intrinsic clock within the plant telling the plant actually to be awake or to sleep, to be said poetically. In some animals, sleep and wakefulness can actually go together hand in hand in a fashion that one brain hemisphere is awake while the other one is asleep. This is the case in those beautiful creatures called beluga dolphin that have these characteristics. So as you can see here, one hemisphere is active if you look at the EEG signal, and the other one is silent, and that is switching, so we actually have sleep and wakefulness at the same time in two different brain hemispheres. However, this is not a fact in the rat or in human. For those dolphins, this phenomenon that has been observed is called unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. As you can see here, while one hemisphere is in deep sleep, the other one is awake, and therefore the dolphin can actually swim all the time. This phenomenon is also observed in some ducks, as you can see here in the cages. The lateral ones, far left and far right, have again unihemispheric sleep. You can see one eye is open while the other one is closed. We also see that phenomenon in the great frigid bird, and if you put the recording system on them, you can actually see that. When those birds are flying north to south, for example, or vice versa, they fly in the V-shaped formation, and those on the outside have actually open eye on the outside, and that hemisphere of the brain being awake while the other one is being asleep, and the other eye is being closed. So we know actually the half brain sleep exists in birds, but what about humans? The story about human is not so obvious. We did not observe the difference in the two hemispheres so far, but there are some studies showing so-called asymmetric slow-wave sleep, which is especially pronounced in some situations like the first-time phenomenon, where you have somebody sleeping for the first night in the new environment or new surroundings. And then you can actually observe the asymmetric slow wave sleep. Also, there is a phenomenon of which most of you are familiar, that is the mothers with newborn babies. They have a waking threshold much, much lower than in the normal circumstances in the same person. Or maybe then this threshold comparing to their husbands. So there are some phenomena observed in humans, but not very much pronounced like in the animals that were described before. In humans, the sleep duration is very much different comparing to different species. So we are somewhere around 8 hours on the average. On the top of the list that you can see here is bat. So no wonder the Batman, he sleeps for about 20 hours a day, could be a hero. On the bottom of this list are domestic animals that sleep only for about 3-4 hours during the night and mainly in the upright position. So those are the different species. But what about the human? The human sleeps differently over the lifespan. In the beginning, newborn babies sleep for about 16 hours. Later, at the lifespan or in the elderly, people mainly sleep only for about 5-6 hours. And why do we sleep? Sleep is, we say, a fundamental need, just like food or water. So despite you are a newborn baby or you belong to elderly group, you'll die without it. And there is also another role which is called 3R. The sleep lets your body and brain to repair, restore, and re-energize. Some people were considering sleep being a passive process. And of course, we understand nowadays that our brains stay remarkably active while we sleep. Sleep is important to a number of brain functions. So just to be listed, here, body and brain restitution occurs during sleep. There is a recovery of synaptic connections. And those are the places between two nerve cells or neurons that communicate with each other. So there is essential role in proper communication of the neurals' synaptic connections. Also, sleep plays housekeeping role. In that housekeeping role, we actually include removal of toxins that accumulate during the day in our brains. And then there is a consolidation of memory, and there is a good solid body of evidence that consolidation of memory occurs in sleep. But some people put a question, whether it's more important to forget unimportant, unnecessary details or to memorize new ones. So there is a process of forgetting, which is also very important in sleep. And after all, children grow in their sleep. In humans, regulation of sleep and wakefulness theory was proposed by Alex Borbély from Switzerland in the 1980s, when he and his group came up with the proposal of the model which is called two-process model. He claimed that sleep is under the control of two separate processes, one called circadian rhythm, or the process C, while the other one is sleep homeostasis, or process S. Couple words about each. Process C, or circadian rhythm, is due to or regulated by the biological clock, which is a structure in our brain. We now know that humans possess the region in the brain, in the hypothalamus, a deep structure in our brains, in the small nucleus, which is called suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is located just above the optical nerve chiasm, and therefore that name. We know that this area of the brain is a master pacemaker for endogenous or internal rhythm, similar to the phenomenon observed by Demerane in the plant with the leaves that was shown at the beginning of this lecture. So we are talking about the endogenous pacemaker, which is the SCN region in the brain, but we also have exogenous stimulation or Zeitgebers, or the time cues that could regulate this clock or master pacemaker. If the question was, how would human behave if there is no time cues whatsoever, if there is no external zeitgebers, if you don't have any idea about what a time is, would we still have the clock operating? Or the rhythm of wakefulness and sleep preserved, like, for example, 8 hours of sleep and then 16 hours a week? There was an experiment performed on a cohort of patients when all the time cues were eliminated and they were free to live in the environment without any information on time, and they were actually free to sleep or to be awake however they wanted. So the question was, how would they behave? After a couple of days of accommodation to the present situation, it was observed that the rhythm was preserved and majority of those subjects in the experiment behave the same way they have the normal rhythm as they have the normal rhythm persisted. However, the duration of the rhythm was not exactly 1 day or 24 hours, but the free run was slightly longer than 24 hours. It was about 24 hours, 40 minutes on the average. So we have the so-called free run and still have the rhythm. When we don't have any time cues or any information about time whatsoever. All animals produce this endogenous circadian rhythm, which is approximately 24 hours, but not exactly, which means that we need to reset our clock pretty much every day. Those rhythms also regulate not only wakefulness and sleep, but also the rhythm of frequency of eating and drinking, the core body temperature, and many other signals like secretion of hormones, urine volume, and sensibility to drugs. So when we say the master pacemaker or master clock in our brains for suprachiasmatic nucleus, this means that all other organs and tissues and most of our cells have their own clocks as well. And this is very important to remember. When talking about the circadian rhythm, most people can easily adjust to 23 or 24, 25-hour day, but not to 22 or 28-hour day. So if you go outside those limits, there are some problems with our behavior and with our mood. The factors included in the mechanisms of circadian rhythm, besides the biological clock, are genes that provide message for synthesis of certain proteins, and also two major factors that could reset the clock. On one side, there is bright light that is keeping us awake, and melatonin, the neurohormone secreted by the pineal gland, which is actually linked to sleep. The anatomy of this area in the brain shows the clock, which is composed of a small group with about 20,000 neurons in this area of the brain. The evidence about this area to be important as a biological clock and providing the rhythm could be supported by the fact that if you damage it, like if you do the lesion in the experimental animal, the lesion of the SEN region, then there is no rhythm preserved. There is both wakefulness and sleep, but there is no rhythm. The importance of circadian rhythm and the processes regulating it were recognized by the scientific community with a Nobel Prize which was given to 3 scientists dealing with the circadian rhythm studies. Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbash, and Michael Young were given the Nobel laureates in physiology or medicine for 2017. They received the Nobel Prize for their discoveries about the circadian rhythm regulation, but not in humans, but in the fruit flies, explaining the roles of period, timeless, and double-time genes and proteins secreted by the message in those genes. As you can see here on this slide, the proteins that were secreted according to the messages from the timeless and period genes, their concentration is going up during wakefulness and going down during sleep. On the bottom, you can see if you expose the organism, the human or the fruit fly, to bright light during the night while you were asleep, the new cycle or the new day starts from there. When we are talking about the circadian rhythm in human, we know there are different types of human with different types of behavior. So some people are considered to be a morningness person, and some are more like eveningness type or eveningness person. And it is also linked to age. So older age type is actually morningness type, and the younger age type is belonging to eveningness type group. So there is a shift to the right or to later hours in the young people, and in the elderly population, there is a shift toward left or toward earlier hours. So this is physiological. And we may actually have behavior disorders that we call advanced sleep phase syndrome or delayed sleep phase syndrome in some subjects. And this is, therefore, there is another joke, which could be present in both American or European students, because they have shift toward the delayed sleep phase. In the morning, we don't pay attention to that. So the class starts at early hours, for example, 8 o'clock for them, and they develop sleep deprivation. So they say better 6 hours in school than not to sleep at all. So there are several different sleep disorders that sleep medicine recognizes these days as circadian rhythm disorders, like mentioned advanced sleep phase syndrome, delayed sleep phase syndrome, but also there are some phenomena as shift work or jet lag. Not getting enough sleep may be in the form of acute sleep deprivation. For example, if you don't sleep at all for one night or maybe even 2 nights in a row, and then chronic sleep deprivation where you don't sleep enough or you don't sleep, let's say, half an hour or 1 hour for the prolonged period of time, like 3-4 weeks. Chronic sleep deprivation is clinically much more significant and causes many more problems to people who experience it than the acute sleep deprivation, from which you can very easily recover. So, besides the process C described here, there is another process called process S. And this process S is also occurring deep inside the brain, partially in the hypothalamus, where the process C is also located, but also in other so-called extrathalamic pathways to cortex, meaning there are some strong neuronal projections from deep inside the brain, finishing up in the cortex, keeping us awake and active. This is, however, very complex topic, so I'll try to make it very simple here. On this slide, you can see the illustration on the wakefulness where you see projections to the cortex keeping our brains alive or our general brain function to be in wakefulness state. On the other hand, you have this situation here where those inputs from deep inside the brain are prevented to go to the cortex, and then we go to sleep. The regulation, which is quite complex here, could be simplified in 2 slides. One slide showing hypothalamus with 2 groups. Front part or anterior part of hypothalamus is responsible for sleep. It is called VLPO or ventrolateral preoptic area containing GABA, which is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in our brains, which keeps our neurons silent or giving a message to our neurons to stop firing action potentials. On the other hand, in the back of the hypothalamus, in the posterior part, there are neurons responsible for wakefulness. They have histamine as a neurotransmitter, and the exact location of those neurons is tuberomammillary nucleus, another anatomical location which is important in this regulation. Actually, this is the only location in the brain which is having histamine neurons. And then there is another part also of the hypothalamus, lateral hypothalamus, which is also responsible for wakefulness, and where we discovered hypocreatine neurons. And those neurons are being damaged in some sudden attacks of sleep, like those that occur in narcolepsy patients. And this is very much reduced the complex theory on the hypothalamus and its involvement in the regulation of sleep. And the other slide is actually showing other brain areas outside of hypothalamus where we have acetylcholine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine neurons being active during different states of mind during wakefulness or sleep. Acetylcholine neurons are located even in the telencephalon, but also in the brainstem, deep inside the brain, and they are more active during wakefulness, but also during special stage of sleep, which is called REM stage. Other molecules, other neurotransmitters, which belong to monoamine neurotransmitter groups, serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, are located in those three areas here, and they are activating cortical neurons. So they are providing wakefulness. During sleep, they are being silenced, and during the REM stage, they are completely shut off. And we believe this is exchange of the REM sleep and non-REM sleep with mutual inhibition of cholinergic and monoaminergic projections. There is another important fact to be mentioned with regard to sleep homeostasis, or process S, and that is that there is accumulation of substances stimulating sleep during the day while we are active, and this is very important accumulation of some molecules in our body or our brain during the day, which means that longer we are awake, the more pronounced is going to be our sleep drive. Among those molecules like adenosine, nitric oxide, cytokines, or prostaglandins, I believe the most important one to be remembered is adenosine. Well, this is basic biochemistry in human telling us that during the day, while we are awake and active, ATP is being used for energy and degraded. So adenosine and 3-phosphate groups are being synthesized, or therefore adenosine accumulates during the day, and it's working on its brain receptors that makes us sleepy. However, luckily we have a countermeasure, which is a simple solution shown here as a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee containing caffeine, which is actually working in a way that it's blocking the adenosine receptors in the brain and keeping us awake. In this picture, you can see the wakefulness with a lot of adenosine being accumulated and working at receptors, providing the effect of sleepiness in ourselves. And then during slow wave sleep, adenosine is being removed, but then caffeine could also act while you have a lot of adenosine and a high sleep drive. By blocking adenosine receptors, you can get wakefulness. And this is the reward given to us by caffeine in the cup of coffee. And finally, to sum it up, we have two major processes in the regulation of wakefulness and sleep. And the present model explaining those mechanisms is called two-process model, which is composed of the circadian rhythm, or process C, and the other one, which is called sleep homeostasis, or process S, as proposed by Alex Borbeli and his group. But they believed that those mechanisms are quite separated in our brains, and now, with some new findings, we understand there are some research data supporting the idea there is very significant crosstalk between those two mechanisms. So the interaction exists, and it is not so very much separated as originally thought by them. So, in conclusion, sleep and wakefulness are essential parts of our behavior or general brain functions, which are quite strongly regulated by several brain mechanisms briefly explained here. Thank you very much for your attention.